Responsive design in Tailwind used to have a huge limitation, and in this video, using Tailwind V4, I'm going to show you exactly how to get around this and make your components more responsive than they have ever been. So what's the limitation that I'm talking about? The breakpoints that Tailwind offers to help with responsive design are only in relation to the width of the entire viewport, never in relation to the width of a single container. What I mean by that is when we're resizing this browser window and we see this width number here at the top of the screen, or we're looking at some mobile screen sizes like this and we look at this width, that number right there at the top of the screen is what all of the responsiveness of Tailwind is based off of. So when using breakpoints like SM, MD, LG, it's all in relation to that singular number. The problem with this is, if we're only using the viewport width and nothing else, it limits us on how fine-tuned we can get with our styling. Let me show you an example so you can see where this becomes a problem. I have a super basic looking dashboard set up right here. I have 3 cards in the dashboard, plus a side nav, and that's it. As I start to shrink the page, the cards should get smaller and smaller to accommodate, which is exactly what we want. Once I fall below the medium breakpoint, which is at 768, which happens right here, notice how the side nav goes away and the cards grow again to fill the empty space. And here's where the problem is. What happens if I have responsive classes in my card component that need to adjust based on the size of the screen? For example, in my card component, I have everything set up as flex call, and then once we get above the medium breakpoint, it goes to flex row. As you can see over here on the right, when we've got wide cards, the text and a button here are laid out in a row layout. And as we get smaller, like we go here, they're in a column layout. That's exactly what this flex call and then MD flex row are doing. But let me show you the problem with this. Notice how the text and button inside my cards are all in a row layout right here. And as I shrink the page, it starts getting cramped together right about here. When my cards are small like this, I want them to be in a flex column to avoid this cramming of text right here. But when they're bigger, like this, I want them to be in flex row. However, if we keep shrinking, we hit this breakpoint where our side nav goes away. And now our cards are in a column format instead of a row. But wait a minute, the cards now are bigger than they were a second ago. Let me show you again. Right here, right before our navbar shrinks, our card is small and cramped together and in a row format. Now, once our navbar is gone, our cards are much larger, but now they're in a column layout. This is completely backwards from what I originally wanted. I wanted small cards to be column layout, like this, and big cards to be in row layout. The cards are bigger right here than they are right here, yet this is a row and this is a column. What I'm trying to show you is that the breakpoints we're using inside this card, namely this MD breakpoint right here, is responsive to the viewport width, not the actual card itself. And this inherently becomes an issue if the card size is not 100% linear. In our example, the card shrinks until it hits the medium breakpoint, then it grows big again, then it gets smaller. So it's not linear, and this throws our responsiveness out of whack. So wouldn't it be ideal if we could perform responsive design based on a particular container width as opposed to the viewport width to give us many more options and customization? Luckily, Tailwind V4 thought of this exact issue. The previous version of Tailwind had a plugin you could use to fix this, but V4 actually has a solution built into the Tailwind core. What's the solution? It's called container queries. And with the implementation of container queries in V4, there's no extra setup or installation needed to use this feature. How to use container queries is pretty straightforward. First, find the container that has the width you are trying to monitor. In the case of our earlier example, we are wanting to monitor the width of each of these card components. Our cards are just width full, meaning they're 100% of the dashboard width, so we'll actually look at the outermost div in the dashboard here. Once you've identified the div that you want, just put @container on it, just like this. That's the first step. I like to name my containers for readability. So to name a container, you can just put a / after container, and then whatever name you want. I'll call mine dash. Now we can save this file here, go back to our card, and inside of our card component, we can see again that we're using this breakpoint right here, this MD. But again, this breakpoint is only in relation to the width of the entire viewport, not the card itself. If I want to change that, and now I want this breakpoint to be in relation to the card, I can simply, in front of this breakpoint right here, add an after the breakpoint, do a /, do the name of the container I want to reference, which I named dash, and that's it. It's that simple. All that this line right here is saying is when the dash container is above size medium, we want to apply flex row. Easy. But wait, before we continue, it's important to note that this MD right here is not the same MD in vanilla Tailwind. And what I mean by that, if we go to the responsive design page on Tailwind, you can see that MD is 768 pixels. But now with the addition of Tailwind 4, if you scroll to the bottom of this docs, you can find container queries down here that will have a separate table. And you can see that MD for a container query is actually 448, not 768. So they're different numbers, and it's important to keep that in mind. What's nice is that if you have the Tailwind IntelliSense extension for VS Code, I can actually go in here and hover over this, and it'll tell me what the width is. It'll say 28 rem, which matches the 28 rem we can see here on the docs. So I recommend having this extension to avoid always having to go back and forth with the docs. Let's make sure this is saved now, and let's actually go back to our page, and let's find the appropriate breakpoint that we actually want. So if I start shrinking this page, you can see right about here is probably where I want to have this breakpoint, right when the text starts wrapping and it starts looking kind of bad. So actually right here at this breakpoint, let's actually go into the DevTools, which you can't see, but I'll just do it real quick. Each card is about 548 pixels in width. So let's go back to our container queries here, and we can see that this XL breakpoint is fairly close to the 548 number. It is 576. So on our breakpoint here, instead of doing MD, let's actually do XL. We'll go back to our page here, save this, and now notice how we're in a column format. I scroll out a little bit, and we're back to a row. So if we start from the top here, and then we start shrinking, you can see it's flex row. The cars become kind of crammed, so they become flex call. Then it keeps going, the side nav goes away, and now they're back to a flex row format until they get small again, and now they're flex call. As you can see, now our breakpoints inside the card are fully responsive to the width of the actual card, not the width of the whole page, which makes this card so much more responsive. And this is just the tip of the iceberg really, because this is a pretty basic example. If you have some really complicated CSS where multiple components are behaving very differently at different screen sizes, container queries are a must-have. And one of the amazing things about container queries is that you can use arbitrary values for the size of the container just like we can with regular CSS. For example, in our component, maybe I don't like using XL. After all, when we looked at it, it was 576, but when we measured the point we actually wanted, it was 548. So we can actually use 548 exactly. So if I go in here, instead of doing XL, I can do square brackets here, and I can just say 548px, just like this. And now if I go ahead and save it, it should behave mostly the same, but now it'll be exactly the number that we picked, not one that Tailwind provided. So if you want to get super specific, you can do it like this too. You're not limited to just these breakpoints. Having support for arbitrary values gives you essentially unlimited customization for these breakpoints, as it allows you to find the exact number that works for your particular container. I want to give a super quick disclaimer that the reason why I use this div here on the dashboard to name the container right here, and I didn't do it on the card itself, is because I can't do container query prefixes on the same div that is the container. So what I'm saying by that is if I went here and I took this code, I just copied this, and I put it on the card like this actually won't work. You can only do these kind of container queries on children of the container. That's why it's on the div directly above this one right here and not on the div itself. If you wanted it to still be in the same component, something super easy you could do is to just make a wrapper div. So I could just make another div like this. I could actually put all of this inside of here and give this a class name. And then this one would have the container on it like this. And this would actually work just fine. So long as the container query is on a child of the container itself, it'll work. Just as another example, here is a side-by-side of a single box component. As you're about to see, this box component will become large on some breakpoints and smaller on others, so it jumps around a lot. Inside this box is a colored button. We want the button to be green if the box is big and red if the box is small. The top screen that you see is with vanilla breakpoints, and the bottom screen that you see is with container query breakpoints. As we shrink the top one with vanilla breakpoints, notice how this behavior holds up until we hit roughly this point right here, and then the button is red for the rest of the way. Despite the fact that the box is jumping sizes, it doesn't matter. The behavior of this button isn't working anymore with the colors that we want because we have no way of tracking the actual card size. However, if we start shrinking this bottom one, notice how it's green for a while, then it hits a point where the box becomes kind of small, so it gets red right here. The card grows again, becomes green because it's bigger, shrinks, and now it's red again. The case where we have container queries is incredibly responsive and allows us to get more creative with our styling. And with that, I hope you were able to learn something from this video, and I definitely encourage you to try out Tailwind V4 and container queries if you haven't already. Take care everyone, and I'll see you in the next one.